suspect that something like that might be going on in the United States. And with that foundation, first of all, we want to start by informing the American population that it is here, researching how many, we don't have data exactly to how many women does this happen, and then educating and influencing the American leadership to prevent these things from happening. And then from there, perhaps the young woman I just described, individuals like that will emerge and will, take the debate themselves to a different level. There was another woman in that Philadelphia library, and here's, I think, where dialogue pays off, who was wearing a headscarf, is a practicing Muslim, and said, I do exactly what you do, but I only do it undercover. And I have
You must have asked her, well, why undercover?
Of course, even though I know it, because a lot of the readers of Infidel were women, and they write to me, and they write to me about the consequences of what they face. They risk being shunned, being vilified, character assassination, being beaten, and sometimes even being killed. So the price that you pay for this transition is very, very, very high. And some of us want to pay that price in our own different way, but we are there. We are there. And I think that right now, the loudest voices that we hear are those people who are saying there's nothing wrong with Islam, it has nothing to do with Islam, or those people who are actively winning hearts and minds of the Muslim community for the jihadi project.
Let me ask you about your foundation. Are you looking at specifically these areas that you identified in the United States, if I understood you correctly, or you're trying to educate Americans about these acts against women and these human rights violations against women worldwide?
Oh, no. I believe in starting small. I also believe in charity begins at home. We are looking at these practices in the United States and educating Americans in the 50 states to look at their Muslim communities, and if they see these practices, to recognize it first as something different and not the general domestic violence, and to do something about it. Sometimes perhaps to adjust legislation, sometimes to take girls in from the streets, because sometimes when you save a girl from misogyny in her own family's house, she ends up in the streets and gets into worse trouble. And I want American families to know that there are young women, often very bright and often very keen to learn, whom they could adopt and could help become American and live the American dream.
Is trafficking one of the issues that's on the agenda or related to these communities?
It is not the agenda of the AHA Foundation, but we work closely with the Somali Mam Foundation, who's really only focused on combating trafficking. She's a Cambodian woman, Somali Mam, who is herself a victim of trafficking. And there are other women's rights organizations that deal with that. But if we see anything that has to do with trafficking, and I'm sure there are many Muslim women who are victims of trafficking, we pass it on to the organizations that we work together with.
What's your recommendation to U.S. policymakers in terms of the violations against women, women's rights, against also the other aspect of your book in terms of integration and how one can help in the assimilation of those coming to the United States? And there are interrelationships here, but what are your recommendations, and how are you trying to get your views out to policymakers in Washington?
What I would like to say to policymakers in Washington is, where the integration or the assimilation of Muslim immigrants are concerned, to recognize that Islam has three dimensions. There's the spiritual dimension of prayer and fasting, and that very personal relationship with one's concept of God. I would tell policymakers to respect that, as they already do so, but to also acknowledge that there are three other dimensions of Islam, as some policymakers already know. One is the political aspect. We call it jihadism or Salafism or Wahhabism, but where young children, young adults are groomed into believing that they are part of an ummah that is under siege and that they have to fight back by whatever means they can. So to be very aware of that political aspect of Islam. And then the third dimension of Islam is the social dimension of Islam, and the emphasis is on the relationship between men and women, but also the treatment of gay people. And if policymakers know that as a religious group, women are discriminated against and that it's justified in the name of a religion, that gay people are discriminated against, it's justified in the name of a religion, then policymakers should pay attention to the plight of the victims, take their side and protect them, and probably educate the perpetrators or the potential perpetrators on American law and American culture and the American value system.
Have you met with state legislators, members of Congress, or members of the administration to set forth your ideas?
I have had superficial meetings, coincidental meetings and conferences with some people who work for the administration, with some people who are in the Senate, with some people who are in the Pentagon. During the former administration, I think I've been once to the Senate, I've been to the Pentagon, I write about it, but I haven't really, sat down and said, okay, I'm going to help develop a policy of integration for Muslims, or even of recognizing that these problems exist in the United States.
Is that something that you hope to do in the months and the years ahead?
It is something I would love to contribute to anything I can in the United States that will help Americans and Muslim Americans become American. And it can be in the following months. I work for the American Enterprise Institute. There's a citizenship project there. I hope to be part of that project in thinking through the different meanings of citizenship and how that is implemented and what that means.
Have you felt that by writing the book that you're also sending a message to others like you in different parts of the world, not just only from Somalia but elsewhere, who are really grappling with these kinds of challenges in their lives? And if so, how do you hope to follow up with that?
I am doing that, and I'm encouraged by the response from people in Kenya, for instance, where I spent a lot of my life. People from India, from Pakistan, even from Indonesia and Malaysia, people from Turkey writing to me after they had read Infidel in their languages and telling me what they think of it and how they identify with me, and informing me about what they're doing in their own societies. I'm encouraged by that, and this book is also for them, and especially for them. I think that persuasion, just the idea, I'm always told, you're so, rosy-eyed about the West, you are dazzled by the West, and I want to say, I am dazzled by the prospect of changing one's mind through dialogue, through reason, and through fact-finding, and by exchanging ideas with people that you disagree with and getting educated. And I find that not only dazzling, but it's something that I'm really grateful for, and I have to say is very unique to the West.
Do you keep in touch with the members of your family, and what are they thinking about this?
I describe that in Nomad in detail. My father passed away, and just before he passed away, he was trying to convince me to come back to Islam. My conversation with my mother is, it's like a one-way traffic. My mother tries also to do the same thing, prevents me from, in her understanding, prevents me from going to hell. My half-sister did exactly the same thing, tries to convince me to come back to Islam. I have another cousin who is much more on my side, but insists that she's still a Muslim and doesn't really want to give up on the religion. So I relate the stories of, and then there's just something that you can never take away when you grow up as siblings. There's that familiarity and that loyalty. I'm looking after my brother's son. And it's just that, basic human relationship that is, I think, much older than religion.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let me ask you, in the United States, many say that when there are those who come here, we're, of course, a country of immigrants, and many have come here with big dreams. What is your big dream? What is it that you hope?
For myself?
For yourself and for others, both.
Well, my big hope for Muslims in general, and Muslims in the West and Muslims in America, is for them to shed the political aspect and the social aspect of Islam. I can live with the religious dimension of it. I mean, if people want to pray, that is fine, but by doing so they don't harm others. But to shed any inspiration they get from Islam to do harm to themselves or others. The big dream for myself is to lead a life in freedom and in safety, and where I can spend part of my life contributing to what I think is the improvement of humanity.
Would you say that you're already living that dream for yourself at this time?
I'm living that dream. I'm living it within the perimeters of the security that I have, but I feel that I'm living it, and I'm really very, very grateful to the American Enterprise Institute that brought me here, and the many American friends that I've already made who make me feel every single day that I meet them that this is a great nation, and I know why it's great. And that doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean that accidents don't happen. It doesn't mean that I think that the oil spill is great and stuff like that, or that the continuous conflict between the two parties is great. But what, as an outsider who has lived in all these places where political conflict always ended up in bloodshed, what I find fantastic about the United States is all these passionate, heated debates that always end up somehow in a vote.
That's true. That's true. There's always a very heated debate and an outcome. And then once there's an outcome, at least most try to stick with it.
No, they move to another subject. So I thought the world was going to be divided by healthcare, and now everyone is talking about the oil spill, and when that is settled, then I think we'll move on to the next subject.
And let me ask you finally, what is your next book going to be on?
My next book is really the book that I wanted to write before Nomad and before Infidel. It's called Shortcut to Enlightenment. It is about the Prophet Muhammad coming back to life in the New York Public Library and meeting Karl Popper and discussing with him the difference between the open society and the closed society. Him meeting with Friedrich Hayek and discussing with him, you know, individualism versus collectivism. Muhammad is going to defend collectivism. Hayek is going to defend passionately individualism. And Muhammad will also talk to John Stuart Mill, another man who is going to defend the equality between men and women. And Muhammad is going to defend his take on why women should be subordinate to men. Well, that is the next book.
Well, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, thank you for coming today, and we're looking very much forward to your next book.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.